So in astrology, we tend to watch, oh, Mercury's retrograde, oh, Mercury's direct by transits. We look at that, but really, that's 1/3 of the cycle. Okay, that's 1/3 of the process to understanding this. And so the usually is 21, 22 days from retrograde to going direct. So that's 22, 21, 22, 23 days, 22, 23 years of our life. But then there's a 22 years before that. Then there's a 22 years after that. You're talking more than 60 years of our life can be involved in this process. And then some people have Mercury, not many, but some people have Mercury just going direct all the time and never goes retrograde in the 3 months after they're born. But within 4 months, like even if it doesn't go retrograde, it's likely you're cutting into this starting point into the beginning of the next phase, but it hasn't got to the retrograde point, so you technically don't have Mercury going retrograde, and you don't live to experience this double thinking, the triple thinking. So you're living one way and you're thinking a certain way, then you get slowed down, you get turned around, have to rethink everything. Then when it goes direct, you've gone back rethinking, you've rethought it so much you're bored to death with rethinking it. And then you have to think it again forward, only like if you're negative the first time, you have to undo the negative, realize how negative it was and think differently. Oh my goodness, I was thinking like that, I got to change this, I guess. Then it comes back and you go, okay, I've changed it. Now you have to go back through it again, thinking positively without the shadows, without the doubts in it, and go forward. And you get back to the starting point, which is a stationary retrograde point, and then it goes forward without having these extra conditions on it. But this represents a huge part of a person's life and a huge part of a person's thinking. If this happens, like some people don't happen, it'll start it different ways, but this is an important thing to realize what's going on with the Mercury retrograde. Now, okay, let's just go a bit further. So here I put the Mercury retrograde, but this shaded part is the stationary. I call it the stationary retrograde. Some people would only say when it's within a minute, just pause. But usually Mercury is within the same degree for, it can be 5 days, can be 5 to 10 days. Mercury's in this, it might be a little less, but 5 to 8 days, Mercury can be within the same degree, slowing down and being there. Well, that's 5 to 10 days. That's 5 to 10 years of your progressed life where Mercury's stationary in this stationary retrograde zone or stationary direct zone, waiting to go forward, but not moving fast enough yet. It still seems to me, 10-year phases, 8 to 10-year phases, parts of our life. And it can zip through this middle period because they're moving quite direct, or retrograde quite fast, but when it slows down to go direct, they slow down. It slows down, and really we have a concentrated symbolism. So like the symbolism of the pentan, the subpentan, and the pentan, the subpentan, the hexagrams, the subhexagrams, sub-subhexagrams, these become accentuated for extended periods of time. So those teachings become really strongly accentuated. And if that happens, and suppose this Mercury direct just happens to be conjuncting Pluto, oh my goodness, this is going to be hitting Pluto. So what will happen is it can go tighter, 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 right up to the Pluto and then back off, or tighter, tighter. It may not quite hit the Pluto and back off, or it may go over the Pluto, pass by, and then come back over. So it sits within a degree of Pluto for 8 years. Think about that. And you will, harshly. But whenever there's a challenge like a harshness of Mercury, you're trying to measure everything out in the world, and really the challenge is there a God? Is it all what you're measuring? Is it all the news? Is it all the fear? Or is there a God? Or is there something? Is there the sun? Of course there's the sun. It's so blatantly obvious, but we're thinking that it's not. So these become spiritual tests in these ways. Every point in your life, every experience is a spiritual test. It's part of your ego's evolution to becoming more of the soul than the ego. And the ego will win. The soul will win because the ego is going to die with the body and the soul is going to still be there. So it wins the battle anyways. It's just how gracefully do you go, how consciously do we go, or do we go kicking and screaming on that path? But these little phases is what I wanted to point out. Just at the starting point, just when you're at the starting point, there's a phase of that degree. Whatever happens in that degree, which could be half a day, can have an effect on 8 to 10 years of your life, or 6 months in progression. Say 6 months in your progression, because Mercury moving fast, it's a couple of degrees in a day. So it's really half a day. But that 1 degree could have spread out to be 8 to 10 years of your life later on. What's happening there has an effect on the station direct. What happens at the stationary retrograde will have a final culminating effect when it gets back to this completion point where you're really completing it and you have to pause there and you have thinking about it. It gets accentuated deeper. And then once that's done, you can move forward without thinking about the same. But then you're almost bored, tired of going over the same stuff again and again and again. And if you're on, you want to think about other things. You want to go in other ways. Okay. Now this is a very simplified version of Mercury just by itself. Now as it's going along there, it's going to go through signs and go back through the same degrees of signs. It's going to go back over the same degrees of signs. So you're going to have a repetition there. It's going to go across. It's going to make aspects, and any aspect it makes in this phase, it's going to make 3 times. You're going to have this soulful relationship to that planet, challenging your thinking, demanding your attention, and challenging your interpretation of your soul versus the outer interpretation of things. One second, I just gotta see. Oh yeah, okay, I see what I did. Here we go. So now, so take some examples of Mercury retrograde. So we're born. Here's Mercury when you're born. It starts going direct. It goes long. It passes the starting point because you don't even know it's the starting point yet. You have to look ahead and back to be able to see where that section of direct is, to see where that starting point would be. That's kind of a hidden point. But you pass that, it goes forward, you're going forward your life, and all of a sudden your thinking slows down, you go as far as you can, and all of a sudden you can't think the same way anymore. It changes. You're having to go back and not forward with your thinking. And you can determine as your life has changed, not moving the same way. In so many ways you can interpret this. But eventually having a, well, wait a second, I can't go forward, I have to go back. Was that really real? Was that correct? What was that? What was I doing a moment ago? What was that? Where is it? It goes back over this whole 22-year period, going back over until it gets back to this stationary direct point. It gets, I say back to that because it's started really back at that same degree 30, 40 years earlier. So it gets there, and then you're tired of reflecting, going back over the same thing, but then you got a new take on it. And you got, okay, I'm going forward. I got to go do things. And you start thinking, and you got to think forward, only you're going to do it right this time. We're trying to think positive this time against the background of what you did and what you reinterpreted and what you're going to do, what you're thinking you're going to do, or what you're thinking now. And then you're still caught in this whole cycle till you get back to the completion point before you go into new territory of thinking freely for yourself without any secondary or tertiary connection. It's thinking. This is complex. Complexes happen. This happened to me here, and my mom did it then, or that happened there, so that's why this is happening now, and that's when, and we begin to see patterns going across big periods of our life, and they're interrelated to each other. But when you lay it out, you start to see, when you see the process, it can begin to make a bit more sense around this. But certainly when it passes, when it gets past this point, you get out of the retrograde zones. You start going forward out, and it's clearer, simpler thinking. You're moving forward again. So in this case, I put Mercury starts here, and it moves forward. It goes past. Then who knows? It goes up, and maybe in the 20s somewhere or 30s, Mercury goes retrograde. 20, 30 days after you're born, which is your 20th, 30th years of your life. It'll slow down. It'll be there for this 5 to 10 years. It'll be in that degree period. Then it's going to retrograde, move forward, going back, thinking over, having to think, what was I doing? Where did I come from? You're rethinking. But my parents told me this. What's that? What they said this? They don't know what they're talking about. What's that? And you're thinking, you're disassociating, and you're reassessing. It went forward. Now it's going back. That's a different type of thinking. How come? It's not being projected. Well, it can be, but it's not necessarily projected. It's something internal going on within you. Then it gets back to this point, and you finally mull it over until you finally tired of mulling over, and you got to go forward, and you got to get this new approach, and you got the new approach, and you're going with it, but nobody's going to notice it because it's still tied up to your previous experiences until you get past the completion point. Okay, now this is the incredible thing with secondary progression. Taking the day for year, watching these things play, you see everything that happens uniquely to you and those days after you're born. So someone born on the 1st of a month, someone born on the 12th of the month, someone born on the 20th of the month, they're in the same year, but the progressions are going to be distinctly different. Things will happen earlier for one and the other, but they'll be years apart. So here's someone with say Mercury's born here. It's technically at the starting point. So Mercury goes forward, then it goes stationary, retrograde in their 20s, backs up to 2020 in the 40s. Mercury backs up until it gets right exactly to the place where it started from. It's way back to you. It's like you're going back to when you were born. You're starting over, all over again. And the seed moment of your natal Mercury and its position becomes the stationary direct point. And suddenly it's like you're having to rethink your thinking, or you're starting over again in your life. You went forward, you came back, now you come back, you're recharging and thinking, I got it right, I got to think like this for myself. Maybe you're thinking about other people all this way, and it comes back, you have to think for yourself. But it backs up to this point, and there's this, it's like you need to go back, right to where you started from. And once you went in touch with, you got the information you needed, the ideas you need, the teacher or whatever you needed, and then you started looking forward again and going forward. And you would go forward on that till it hit the completion point. So you're talking 40, you're talking 50s, 60s, completion point. Or it can be 10, 15 years, 15, 20 years. This can move fairly fast. Once it goes direct, it moves really fast for this last period. But this degree is not free of it till you really pass that completion point. Okay. Now, if someone's Mercury is here, they have their Mercury direct in their natal chart. It goes forward 5 or 10 years and then goes retrograde. Well, they're starting school, suddenly Mercury goes retrograde, and they're backing up and they're thinking, not everybody else is doing that around them. As your thinking backs up and pulls in, it's not interrelating in the same way. It's going back rethinking things. That's be things that have to run through your thinking. So you go through the retrograde period, then it retrogrades, you're going back, and there's a point, I didn't mark it, where it gets back to its natal position. Well, it gets back to the natal position, you recharge to get the information where I started my life from. Mercury's back where it started from. And then but it doesn't stop there, it keeps going back, before where you started, before where you came into life with it. Your mind starts going back in prenatal concerns. It's like you're going back to thinking about other lifetimes, thinking about other places, things that happened before this lifetime. And there's some message you didn't get, or something you didn't think that you had to rethink it through, and you're going back assessing it like that. So while you're assessing that, you're certainly not projecting out into this world so much. You may be progressing, but your mind is backing into, you're having to go back and get some information you didn't bring with you across your lifetime. Then it goes back as far as it could possibly go, and you're back in your previous lifetime. Your body's here, you're living your life, you're in school, you're working, you're doing something, you're married, whatever, but your mind isn't there. You ever met anybody like that? Okay, so how come?